So, as we can see by the natural formation of things like the EU trade agreements like NAFTA, USMCA, that are, and the USMCA that intertwine economies and allow freedom of movement and uh, between countries that are part of the same continent, as well as numerous free trade agreements that globalize the economy. Uh, Globalization is a something that's been happening naturally and has overall been a net benefit to society. The natural progression of that is the globalization of government, not to mention how crucial the UN has been for world governance. The way I personally would want to see a world government set up is a mix between the EU and the United States, where we would have a global parliament that is a multi-party democracy with equal representation based off of population, like similar to how the EU and America are both set up. I would want us to have an executive branch, and I would want to turn the ICC into the judicial branch, and I would want to turn Interpol into the global police force, as the ICC and Interpol are generally already set up to be able to serve both of those purposes. Now, where the America side comes in more, I would want uh, us to still have a degree of shared sovereignty with global federal government, while the federal government still holds the majority of the power. But why should we embrace and put effort towards expediting this process? What issues in society would be solvable via the establishment of a globalized government? Well, for starters, we would be able to remove tax safe havens, so corpos and individuals would no longer be able to use tax safe havens to avoid contributing to society. In global health crises like COVID, we would be able to have more organized responses, and there would be no long we would no longer be dealing with countries who are trying to serve their own individual interests. And then we'd also be able to uh, standardize environmental protection, social safety nets, human rights. Things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights would no longer be worthless political posturing and would actually be enforceable. We would be able to better empower the ICC and Interpol to actually be able to properly act as global justice systems. They are already supposed to be, due to the fact we would we would naturally establish freedom of movement globally. It would also prevent people from, and like Andrew Tate, from being able to commit atrocious crimes in one country and fleeing to another country for political protection. The opening of the economy to everyone would create more opportunities for people to be able to move for economic opportunities without having to jump through the thousands of dollars of hurdles to get work visas. We would be able to finally put an end globally to child slavery and child labor and slavery, because with the globalization of the government, uh, we would be able to we would have more means to actually enforce the end of such human rights violations. There is so many ways that we would be able to globally improve the lives of the people around the world.
Okay, so my first question is, do we need a overarching federal government to establish free trade between different countries? In this example, they would be like states or whatever.
Uh, in the example that I'm going with, yes, it would make it easier. So for the economic aspect, not necessarily, but I'm not just focusing on the economic aspect. I'm also thinking about like the standardization of laws, uh, specifically so we can remove things like slavery and child labor as well.
Okay, just for the question's sake, we can have free trade agreements between separate countries, right?
We can just have
Right.
free trade agreements. Yes.
Right. Okay. And then can we also, without the use of a overarching world government, push for laws such as human rights laws and other things like ending child slavery? Can we have influence push countries to do so without? Yeah.
We can push for it, but it's very clearly shown that it's not effective for us to just sit there and push for it without an overarching government.
Okay. And then my final question is about obviously throughout history, most countries and most groups of people are resistant to the idea of being occupied and ruled over by a larger state. So obviously, this is going to come into play if we have a world government. Every single country is going to resist this. How do you think that we can bypass that?
Uh, so generally speaking, because we are already seeing the formation of minor world governments, both in Europe and in North America, we really wouldn't see much. I don't think we'd really see much resistance between North America and Europe. The main areas that I think we would see the most resistance is going to be the Middle East, um, which honestly, in order to resolve the issues in the Middle East, the Middle East is going to need some very heavy authoritarianism, anyways.
Okay, so even if we were to assume that world government system is possible to implement, despite all countries throughout history resisting any kind of occupation by a larger government, and with the establishment or with the knowledge that every country is going to have national pride, an innate desire to remain, to have their country have independence. Even if this were possible, it wouldn't be practical, right? The greatest issue that we face in America is, or one of the greatest issues we face in America is just our size, having a federal government. Having a federal government creates issues of bureaucracy, of slow movement of laws, of just literally losing tax dollars due to having government officials dealing with the interaction between different government states. We see in Congress nowadays that we can't even get laws passed because we have so many people from different countries and different places fighting for their own gains. Right? There's this gridlock that we have. Imagine if we were to expand this from a 300 million population country to a 8 billion population entire world across the entire like span of the globe with the difficulties of communication and with all the different countries that we would need to bring in to whatever Senate Parliament to be represented. Um, we I can't even see how we would establish any laws. And even if we could do those kinds of laws, I mean, we can have the establishment of laws that we might like no child labor. But generally speaking, federal laws are really flawed and kind of weak. They can't account for all the different nuances that every single country is going to face. We can pass laws based on economy, right? But every country is going to have a different economy. Every like if we were to implement tax brackets, well, all these different countries have different currencies, even right. Um, and I had a third point. I concede my time.
Yeah, so could you provide an example of a country that doesn't have bureaucratic issues?
Bureaucratic issues. Well, it would be the third world countries that don't have very little government, right? Those probably have minimal bureaucratic issues.
Yeah, but at the same time, they're not getting anything done in general, anyways.
Right. Well, bureaucratic issues are a spectrum. It's not you have it or you don't, right? By having a larger government, we're going to be where we are more um, frozen with those bureaucratic issues, and the more money we have to invest into people who are handling all that paperwork.
Uh, there was another question I forgot to write down. Yeah, I'll cede for now on the rebuttals.
Okay, so you said that. Wait, here's my okay, I just remembered what the last point I was gonna make during my opening was, and I would like an answer to this. So, if we were to get every country on board with being ruled by an overarching federal government, say they agree to being subject to whatever laws this government establishes, why wouldn't we use that willingness to cooperate to just create alliances and enforce our influence that way? If a country is saying, okay, yeah, you can rule over us and implement child safety laws, couldn't we just do that without implementing this great federation by just saying, hey, we're America. If you want to be in an alliance with us, you have to implement these kinds of laws, which is something we do already.
So we do that already to a degree, but as I mentioned earlier, that's not something that really necessarily works I mean, like a great example of that is like we have alliances with a lot of African countries, and we do a lot of work with a lot of African countries. But the number one place in that we have that still has like slavery and fucking child labor is Africa.
We have alliances with countries in Africa, but they're very temperamental. The reason that we can't implement laws, that we can't enforce our will as much as we would like to on these countries is because our relationships are so weak. Could you imagine if you were to go to these countries and instead of saying, hey, implement human rights, we say, hey, you're a part of the world government now? They would never agree to it. And if at any point they would be willing to agree with it, they're probably so willing, they're probably so. Strongly on board with an alliance with us, that they are willing to implement those laws anyways.
I mean, we were allies with China for the longest time, and they still utilize child labor. And we never, even before all of the issues that Trump caused, where we started fighting with China, because if you actually look at the history between the U.S. and China, Trump caused all of those, the majority of those issues in his first term. Um, we never even attempted to push for China to end child labor.
I mean, I don't know if we were ever in an alliance with China in the same way that we're in alliance with European countries, right? I don't. It was always like, we had trade agreements. I don't know if we were in a full-on, alliance. We would have been, still economic rivals. We still would have been I mean, after the Cold War, one of our biggest opponents, because they were a communist country, was China. There was actually threats of nuclear war between us and China. So no, I don't think that yeah, of course we can't like enforce our we never had the ability to enforce our will on China, and we were never at a position where we could say um like bring them into a fold of a world government. Again, I mean that's really the core of it. Why is this the
I
solution? It
mean,
seems like a very poor solution.
to a degree, the thing is, like, to a degree, we already have a world government with the establishment of the UN. The whole reason why the UN is as ineffective as it is, though, is primarily because of the US and Russia's veto powers. The and the whole reason why I would rather switch to a more updated system is to be able to get rid of those powers because without getting rid of those powers, the UN is going to continue to be useless, and the U.S. and Russia are not going to get rid of those veto powers.
Well, the uselessness of the UN is the reason that it's allowed to exist. The UN is no In my opinion, the UN is nowhere close to being an overarching government that can have authority over the countries within it. America is not going to be subservient to the UN, and if the UN decides to like pass laws or I wouldn't pass that you can't pass laws. If they were to make a decision that the America didn't agree with, then we might just leave, and if we did that, the UN has no sort of repercussions. So again, the barrier between whatever we have established now, including the EU in Europe, and including the UN, is nowhere near what it would be to have a federal Interpol policing state that has absolute control. Not, I mean, relatively absolute control over all countries.
Well, I mean, Interpol has jurisdiction in damn near every country in the world. The harder part is going to outside of like the establishment of the a world government would be getting the ICC to actually have jurisdiction in more countries than it already does because we see more problems with the ICC not being able to be utilized properly than we do with Interpol.
I'm sorry, can Interpol so say that a country is like a major country is and I'm actually ignorant on this. If a major country like a world power is committing war crimes, what power does Interpol have to step in and stop them like immediately?
So It doesn't, but that's only because of the ICC. The way that that works is the warrants have to be issued by the ICC, and if a country is not signed on to the ICC, then Interpol really cannot do shit. We see that a great example of that is with Israel. We have the ICC warrant out for Benjamin Netanyahu's arrest, but Interpol cannot do anything about it because of the fact that Israel is not signed on to the ICC.
Okay, well, let's take the example of Russia. I would assume Russia is a part of the ICC, right?
Yes.
So obviously, Russia is committing war crimes in Ukraine, and I'm sure Interpol has many regulations against so much of what Russia is doing to Ukraine. What power does Interpol have to come in and say, uh, "Russia, you have to stop. You're not allowed to do this"? What recourse does Interpol have right now?
Well, they would need a warrant from the ICC, and to my knowledge, they don't currently have a warrant from the ICC for anybody in the Russian government.
Okay, and if they did, they could come in and like could they come in and say and disempower Putin?
They could potentially go in and arrest Putin. Yes.
Potentially arrest Putin.
Th-
Okay, I mean, I think there's a lot of potential there, but
That's
I don't.
that's part of the purpose of Interpol.
Right. I get that that's like a potential, but I don't think that any force has the authority to come into a country and enforce laws all on its own that the country isn't going to agree to, right? I mean, I would say at this point, if that were to happen, the most practical result would be if a warrant wasn't initiated from Interpol to Russia against Putin, then Russia would probably leave the ICC, and if the ICC still came in with Interpol and tried to like attack them, there would probably be resistance. It would probably be war, right? Something like that's the reason. Again, with the ICC, with every other country, with the UN, the reason that they sign on to these agreements is because of the lack of authority that they have. Right? It's general agreements. It's general handshakes in the dark about, hey, let's not do this sometimes. And if I change my mind,
E-
then there's nothing you can do. They're not gonna agree to,
Yeah,
like,
and
an absolute authority over them. It is a completely different realm.
I mean, that's the whole problem with the way that the ICC and Interpol and all that is set up currently is the fact that it generally has no authority. So we don't have any ways to prevent things like war crimes. We don't have any ways to prevent things like child slavery. We don't actually have any actual way to fully enforce international law because, as you said, they can just pull out of it. That's why we need a unified world government is to actually prevent those things from happening.
Don't you think that, like, obviously, no, like, China's not gonna agree to this. I mean, with the system that you, propose, this is like a democratic system where every country gets into a parliament and votes on this stuff. Like, Russia's never gonna agree to that. China's never gonna agree to that, and these are major world powers. Don't you think that even if we could practically implement that, it would be massive, like, like, it would definitely be World War III, right? And it would probably be more violent than World War II, right? Again, like, this doesn't seem like the most practical solution.
I mean, at the point we're at now, World War III is pretty much already inevitable because of the actions of our current administration. So this is
Are
likely something that would be able to happen
are we in
after
talks
the fact,
to
anyways.
enter, like are we in talks to enter, like, on the ground combat with China or Russia?
No, but NATO has actually been threatening military action against us because of Trump's actions against Greenland. Did you not hear about that?
Well, no, I'm aware of, the issues between us and, Greenland, and honestly, I mean, it's up in the air, but I think that a lot that's mostly posturing, right? It's not an actual plan to, engage in military combat with NATO. I don't think that it'll actually come to that, right? Whereas
Uh, a lot of our NATO allies have already moved troops to Greenland, and France,
yeah, I don't think
Germany,
I mean, they would, right?
UK.
Obviously, if their country is being if their land is being threatened, they would mobilize mobilize troops. But I think obviously, I think that it's silly to think that Trump would actually go to war with our NATO allies, and I don't think that like our president, Congress, and military generals are going to sign off to that, right? Versus like a actual plan, like that kind of thing is ridiculously stupid and a horrible idea. Starting World War III, like mobilizing our troops against a country like or like a force like NATO is horrible idea. Mobilizing our troops against China, horrible idea. Mobilizing our troops against Russia, I mean, it's up in the air. They're not as strong, right? Um, but again, so justifying that against all the countries that we oppose and probably some that we are currently allies with, that doesn't make that any better of an idea, right?
I mean, like I said, it's more likely to be something that happens after World War III already happens. Like it's something that's it is inevitable already down the line, but it's more than likely not going to happen until the conclusion of World War III, assuming there's anybody left, and
All
it's
right.
not a nuclear war.
What benefit would ceding power to a world government be for larger world powers?
Yeah. So one of the things that I didn't really get into, or we didn't really get into, is like the currency aspect, because in one of the things that we would end up doing is likely shifting to one global currency, which would eliminate currency risk. If you don't know what currency risk is, that's the exchange rate between currencies. Um, and what that would allow for is basically when specifically with the corporations doing business in other countries or in their own country, there would be no currency risk between moving currency between countries. And so, like with a lot of the countries, like here in the United States, them doing business in like Europe or Africa, then they would not have as much of a lost profit,
All right.
and it would positively impact our economy.
So I'll make this quick because yeah, it's more probably more aimed at vigilante, but generally there are some benefits, but these are benefits for the populations of those countries. The major downside of implementing this force would be to disempower these countries, and that runs counter to what these countries want. These countries want to gain power; they want to establish power, and so no practical element is going to override that desire that every country has.
What countries have veto power in the UN? Do you happen to know?
I mean, technically, all countries have uh, a downvote, but specifically the ones that have override veto powers are the US and Russia.
What powers do you think that a federated government would have to have in order to enforce their law?
So a couple of them would be free movement of federal of like worldwide federal police, right? Or not police, military, right? And police to implement anything that they want, right? So if a country doesn't do what they want, they can just mobilize troops into their country at will. Another one is like kind of what the American federal government has, which is like the establishment of laws that override any laws within any individual country. So anything that the parliament passes takes priority over any law that any of these countries take.
Realistically, the only way that we'll ever have a chance to ever like end world hunger or have truly ever actually be able to force world peace upon the world is would be through a world government. I say this because we would be able to rapidly industrialize non-industrialized world, via the power of a world defense force. We would be able to pressure both sides of the Middle Eastern and Eastern European conflicts into backing down. Um, as I mentioned, we would be able to further establish the ICC to actually be able to be useful, because the way that the ICC works right now, it is effectively toothless. Uh, it can issue warrants, as I mentioned, but they cannot be enforced as long as the country is not signed on to the ICC. One of the things that we didn't get into would be the immigration issues of a unified world government, which is a very controversial topic nowadays, obviously, we would be able to have freedom of movement between states, just like in America or in the EU, where people can move between states, or people can move between countries to go to work. We'd be able to have people collect across the globe for better opportunities. For example, be able to have the majority of the people researching tech collect in Japan, which is currently the tech capital of the world. We could have people researching science or medicine collect here in the United States, or we could have them collect in China or wherever the country is that the majority of medical research is happening. And with a lot of the jobs for like factories and stuff moving overseas, people would be able to more easily move to where those jobs are, especially because a lot of the resources for those jobs, especially if we talk about like mining and stuff, are primarily in Africa. They're not primarily in the United States. It would make it a lot easier for people to be able to move for getting better jobs in general. I mean, also we'd be able to institutionalize like a global minimum wage and push up the living standards of the non-industrialized world in general.
Okay, so in my opinion, this debate kind of showed to me, at least, more that my main point of the downsides of a world government are not worth the upsides, especially when those upsides can be achieved through other means, through more practical means. It's like nuking an anthill, right? If you want a country to start implementing human rights laws, the way isn't to dominate them and to occupy them, right? You can do that through diplomacy. Um, he brought up how in his plan the way that we would establish a world government is by allowing World War III to happen, and then once it's happened and completed and finished, then we could and we've defeated these other countries, we can implement a world government and take them over, right? But that's, again, it's not that simple. Assuming that World War III happens, right? um, our plan to implement a world government is going to have a major impact on that. Say that we get into conflict with China and that ends up resulting in troops on the ground. Well, how that's going to turn out is based on what our goals are. If our goals are to stop whatever conflict and resolve whatever occupation that is happening that we don't like, then they might just pull back because it's not practical. But if our goal is to bring them into a fold of an overarching federal government, then it's not going to be that simple. It's not. They're not going to pull out, and they're not going to end the conflict in any reasonable time. It's going to need to be a absolute domination of our country over theirs, and we're gonna have to slaughter them. And again, these are the kinds of things that we need to that we need to do to establish a world government. We didn't talk much about the like issues of like bureaucracy and like having to pay having to pay for having a federal government in order to have, like, if we needed to fund an international world police and military in order to enforce these laws on top of each military that each country would have to have, because you know that they would, that's more tax dollars for every clerk, for every building, for every branch of government that we have. It costs more money. I think one of the best examples that destroy his argument is one that he brought up in his concluding argument, which is, well, we can implement a worldwide minimum wage. Again, the exact kind of law that is so bad for a federal government. I mean, it's a rough one for our federal government to pass, let alone a world federal government where every single country has wildly different economies and laws and even currencies. I mean, he said we can establish a universal currency. Like, imagine the type of work that we would need to do that. We need to literally, even just the printing of the money, but also all the logistics. I'm done.